an original MCM production.
Now to introduce our program. Today you're going to hear an interview between Senator Ron Johnson and Steve Walters. Steve was with us to interview Senator Russ Feingold in March, and we welcome him back to interview Senator Johnson today. Steve Walters has been a senior producer of WisconsinEye since 2009. Before that, he was Wisconsin Bureau Chief for the Milwaukee Sentinel-Journal, as well as Journalist of the Year by the Milwaukee Press Club in 2012. He's a part-time journalism instructor at UW-Madison for the past 22 years. So, Steve, if you want to come up and introduce the program.
Thank you to the Rotary for letting WisconsinEye be a part of this. The format is the same as with Mr. Feingold in March. Senator Johnson will give opening remarks. I will then ask questions, and at 1 o'clock, from 1 o'clock to 1:15, we will go to your questions. Republican Senator U.S. Ron Johnson was a business executive. He ran a manufacturing company in Oshkosh. When he ran for the U.S. Senate in 2010, he was elected, defeating then incumbent Senator Russ Feingold. He now is chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. He also serves on the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, Senate Committee on the Budget, and Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. He's finishing his first term. Without further ado, would you join me in welcoming Senator Johnson?
Well, thank you, Steve, and John, and Tom, and really thank all the Rotarians and their guests for first of all inviting me here, but also for being part of a great organization. Before I ever ran for the U.S. Senate, my background is educationally accounting, ran a manufacturing plant producing plastic materials, exporting to 20-some different countries around the world. So I'm a manufacturer, but I was really involved in my community on a volunteer basis, particularly for education. First with the Catholic school system. By the way, I'm on Team Luther, but I wanted to make sure that the Catholic school system, which was the stronger private sector education system in Oshkosh, could survive. And it's difficult, it struggles. But then also as the business co-chair of our Partners Education Council of our chamber. And in that involvement, in that community involvement, certainly what I found out is that it's these community organizations. It's really what Alexis de Tocqueville found out about America, too, that these civic institutions really make America strong. And I think one of the main reasons it does is, as we see, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, that on the federal level, government level, all the division, all the divisiveness, all the politics that are played, all the partisanship, you don't see that on a local level. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but in general, what I found is at a community level, whether it's the chamber, whether it's the Rotary, it's just community members coming together to solve a problem. Trust me, in the Partners Education Council, we had all the stakeholders. We had college professors, we had school administrators, we had K through 12 teachers, we had the Catholic school system, the public system, we had businesses. Politics never came up. We had the most liberal, I would say, law professors, most conservative business people. Never came up. We were just concerned about what we need to do to improve education for our kids. And an organization like Rotary, by the way, I've always loved your 4 tests. Is the truth? Is it fair? Will it be beneficial? And is it beneficial to everyone? And will it foster goodwill and better friendships? And those are pretty good tests for basically human activity. And so again, I just want to thank all of you for being involved in a great community organization. This is really where I think these problems are solved at a local level. We just celebrated the 240th anniversary of the marvelous signing of a marvelous document, the Declaration of Independence. As a business person, I certainly found it was very helpful to have a mission vision statement for my business. Well, I think within that Declaration of Independence is probably the most wondrous vision statement for self-governance ever written by mankind. We hold these truths to be self-evident. I love that word, self-evident. It's just so obvious. It's so obvious that we are endowed by a creator with certain unalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's something every American can agree with, which is really, I think, the main part of my opening remarks, and then hopefully we'll continue it through the question and answer period, but it's finding areas of agreement. I was in business for 30-some years. I did a lot of negotiating. I didn't sit down at a negotiating table and start arguing right off the bat. It's not very productive. What I would always do is I'd lay out all the areas of agreement. It developed a relationship, a level of trust with my negotiating partner. And so at the very end, when you finally came to those areas of disagreement, it was a whole lot easier finding common ground. So my assumption here is we have a bipartisan crowd, and that's great. So let's start a political discussion on an area of agreement. We share the same goals. We all want a safe, a prosperous, and secure America in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee. We're concerned about each other. There's no one political party that has a monopoly on compassion. We all want all of our fellow citizens to succeed, to have an opportunity to build a good life for themselves or family. Isn't that also self-evident? Isn't that also obvious? If we start from that assumption that whoever we're talking about with any kind of political discussion is we share the same goal of wanting this country to succeed and all of our fellow citizens to have a good life for themselves or family, trust me, it's a whole lot easier finding common ground. And we have enormous challenges facing this nation. As chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, I'm often asked, what is the greatest threat facing this nation? I could run down a whole list and ruin your day. And it's up to Steve whether or not he runs me through that list and I do ruin your day or not. But I've been answering it a little more unusually recently by saying it's the denial of reality. It's an affliction that on a bipartisan basis, too many people in Washington, D.C. suffer from. They're just not willing to admit the reality situation. As a result, these problems continue to go on. They continue to fester. And what we get instead are elections that are just based on nonsense. Issues there, they may have some importance, but on the priority scale, way down the list versus the enormous challenges we face. Now, one of the things I did as chairman when I took it over in 2015 after the 2014 election is I actually worked with my ranking member, Tom Carper, the former chairman, and we developed a mission statement. It's a pretty simple one: to enhance the economic and national security of America. Economic and national security, they're inextricably linked. But the benefit of doing that is it accomplished two purposes. First, it started our new relationship as chairman and ranking member on an area of agreement. Again, who can disagree with that? To enhance the economic and national security of America. It also set the tone for our committee. It directed our activity. By the way, in running what historically had been a very bipartisan committee, it still is. I think we're one of the few committees that we interlace Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat. We don't take sides. We have a Republican sitting next to a Democrat around the committee hearings. But by focusing on areas of agreement, there's so many problems out there. There's so many issues that need resolution. When you concentrate on problems that we can agree on what the problem is, and then work on a bipartisan fashion to find agreement on solutions that actually solve the problem, it's amazing what you can accomplish. As Harry Truman said, it's also amazing what you accomplish if you do not care who gets credit. So using that approach, having a mission statement, trying to find areas of agreement, identifying problems, and by the way, not the kinds of things, not types of pieces of legislation that grow government, but identify a problem and make government just a little more efficient, a little more effective, a little more accountable. We've actually, out of my committee, reported out 83 pieces of legislation. 26 have already been signed into law. I bet you didn't know that. But again, that's called getting real results using a business person, an outsider's approach to trying to find agreement and solving problems. Now, The challenges we face, again, are enormous. I happen to agree with Admiral Mike Mullen. If you start talking about national security, by the way, if there's probably one word that can describe what's on Americans or Wisconsinites' minds, and this has been true ever since I became United States Senator. I've traveled all over the state tirelessly since day one. The word security. But it's not just national and homeland security. It's job security, it's income security, it's retirement security, it's healthcare security. People are concerned, and they are justified in being concerned about that security. But I'll tell you what, the number one component of solution to solve all the problems, Admiral Mike Mullen said that the greatest threat to our national security is our debt and deficit. So again, we got problems obviously on the homeland security with ISIS now inspiring and directing these terrorist attacks. National security, the world has not improved over the last few years. Our debt and deficit is enormous. Over the next 30 years, according to CBO, the projected deficit will reach about $103 trillion. That's not debt, that's just the deficit. Tack that $103 trillion on to $19 trillion, you're up to $122 trillion of debt within 30 years, which we know, I got white hair, 30 years goes by like that. So all these problems are debt and deficit, national security, homeland security, the fact that wages have stagnated, and that's true. The number one component of a solution for all these problems, not a panacea, won't solve all the problems, but is the number one component is economic growth. Let me demonstrate to you how powerful economic growth is, even with the meager economic recovery we've had since 2009, the trough of the revenue. Revenue has increased to the federal government by about $1.1 trillion per year with meager economic growth. We've been right around 2%, maybe a little less than that since the recovery. Historically, for 100 years, America grew at about 3.5%. So if we grow, for example, from 2% to 3%, that would add $14 trillion in economic activity over 10 years. 2 to 4% adds $29 trillion. So again, as a business guy, as a manufacturer, somebody actually does root cause analysis, knows how to solve problems, there you go, there's a solution. We've got to grow our economy. Rather than demonize and demagogue success, which is what happens in a political environment. You pick out the business and it's got big attached to it, right? Big oil, big farm. I don't know, silly me. Am I the only guy that literally drives my gas tank down where I got 10 miles left and I'm really glad there's a gas station on the corner? Am I the only guy that wants life-saving new drugs? Demonizing and demagoguing success destroys the very fabric of this nation. We need to incentivize and celebrate it. Now, the good news is we actually know how to grow an economy. As America, we've done a marvelous job. Again, yesterday was our 240th anniversary, July 4th, 1776. This, what I call a marvelous, this wonderful, this precious experiment in self-governance and limited government, America. There was another thing that was birthed in 1776. It was Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. I didn't realize that. I just by happenstance. I'd never seen that connection before. But it literally was Adam Smith's concept of an invisible hand, which was revolutionary in economic thinking, where you literally have billions of individual consumers making billions of individual consumer decisions. Just magically, through that invisible hand, moves economic activity in the most efficient manner. You combine that notion of a free market, competitive, cooperative system with this marvel of a vision statement of self-governance. We hold these truths. And we end up with the American economy. And we end up with America. We are about 5% of the world's population, yet we represent 20 to 25% of the world's goods. That's a marvel. That's because of men and women like you, people that want to build something, that aspire to innovate and create, provide opportunities and great paying jobs for your fellow citizens. That's what made this country great. Individuals operating within this system of individual liberty and freedom and embracing an economic system that allows them to flourish and have our economy flourish. It's not because of big government. Our founders were geniuses. They truly were. By the way, Peggy Noonan has a great column in Saturday's Wall Street Journal talking about these clusters of geniuses. We've been so fortunate throughout our history to have these clusters, certainly in our founding. But our founders obviously came from, and their heritage was dictatorial monarchies and aristocracies. They understood that as men and women, if we don't want to live in chaos and anarchy, we have to have government. But they understood that government wasn't created here to solve our own problems. They understood that government, by and large, was something to fear, because as it grew, our freedoms, which they valued above all else, and shouldn't we all? What's more important than individual liberty? Your life, your liberty, your God-given right to pursue your own dreams, pursue your own happiness. What is more important than that? Our founders understood that as government grew, their liberties necessarily receded, which is why they tried to put a framework in place to limit the growth in government. But over 240 years, those limits haven't worked out too well. And so now we're facing literally a prospect of our children's future being completely mortgaged. You think it's sustainable to have $103 trillion worth of deficit over the next 30 years? You think America can ever sustain a debt level that exceeds $120 trillion? If you do, there's probably a bridge or two I can sell you. So let me end on this note, describing the denial of reality, and then I'll let Steve come on up here and start grilling me. He won't do that. Steve's a nice guy. I was in the White House after President Obama got reelected in August 2013, and literally, and this happened way before that, but after he got elected, President Obama reached out, and I appreciated this, invited 24 Republican senators to have lunch or dinner with him. I was in the first group of 12. And partly, maybe largely because of my prodding at that first dinner, I said, Mr. President, if you're serious about tackling the debt and deficit issue, that's why I came here. I came here because we're mortgaging our kids' future. Make your White House staff available to us. Let's work together. Let's try and find the areas of agreement, at least start making a dent in this unsustainable debt and deficit we're incurring here. And so he did make his White House staff available, and then as kind of being the accountant in the group, I was one of 8 Republican senators who was working with the White House. It all culminated in about a 2-hour meeting in the White House. President Obama joined us for the last half. He was sitting right next to me. When I had my turn to speak, I had my little 30-year deficit chart all ready for him. It's the one that I've included in my PowerPoint presentations. By the way, I've given that PowerPoint presentation. This would be a massive audience to about 17,000 Wisconsinites, just trying to show them the reality of the situation. You'll never solve a problem if you don't first admit you got one, right? So we're in the White House, and President Obama joins us for the second half of that meeting. I slid my little deficit chart under his nose. I said, Mr. President, I'm a pretty small voice. You're the president. You got the bully pulpit. Please use it. Take the American people the truth. Show them the depth of the problem so collectively we can take that first step in solving a problem, which is admitting you've got one. You know what he said to me? Now again, this is a president of the United States who just got reelected, August of 2013. A president at that point has the maximum amount of political capital and ability to actually do something for the American people, to solve a problem. You know what he said to me? He said, Ron, we can't show the American public numbers that big. If we do, they'll get scared and give up hope. So besides, Ron, we can't do all the work. We have to leave some work for future presidents, future Congresses. Now, I don't know about you, but my jaw must have hit the table. But again, he's not the only one. Again, take a look at the issues we're discussing in this campaign and ask yourself, do they really measure up to the magnitude and the enormity of the problems we're facing? Or are we just going through the same old political campaigns, the same old demagoguery, the same old lies, the same old BS that quite honestly has left us in this position today facing these enormous problems that we're just not addressing? So I'll finish it off on this. I made 2 promises when I first ran in 2010. The first one is very Rotarian. I promised I'd always tell Wisconsinites the truth. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I correct them. I admit I make the mistake. But I've honored that promise. And my second promise was I'll never vote in my reelection mind. I'm going there to solve problems. Now, I will admit that the second promise is easy to make because I never intended to run again. My faulty assumption is I literally didn't think President Obama had a chance of getting reelected. Obamacare, $1 trillion deficit. So my game plan was spend 2 years, get up to speed, try and get some measure of this massive federal government. And then give it a shot, 4 years. Work with hopefully a serious president, somebody who's willing to take the American people the truth, take tough votes. The kind of votes that probably wouldn't allow me to get reelected. That's exactly what Romney wanted to do. I endorsed him because when I met him before the Wisconsin primary in 2012, he said, Ron, I expect to be a one-term president. I'm going to fix these problems. It won't be popular, won't be fun, probably make it impossible for me to get reelected, but I intend to do it. And then when he picked Paul Ryan to be his running mate, I knew he was darn serious. So if there's one thing I represent to Wisconsin, it's that seriousness of purpose. My guarantee, I will tell you the truth. I will lay out the reality. I've done it across the board in a host of issues as chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. That's an important position. It can be very beneficial to Wisconsin in that role because you will never solve a problem unless you're willing to actually face your reality, define it properly, identify it. Root cause analysis, that's what my manufacturing background taught me. But in the end, having the courage to admit you have it. So again, thank you Rotarians, thank you all for inviting me here.
You're in the far. You're in the far. Thank you, Senator. Because this just happened, let me ask about it. At 10 o'clock this morning, FBI Director Comey said the emails, including 8 top secret, sent to and from Secretary Clinton's private email services were handled extremely carelessly, could have been hacked or compromised, but no charges are appropriate. Director Comey said no reasonable prosecutor would bring charges. Your reaction to that, sir?
Well, it's not exactly absolution, is it? Didn't Hillary Clinton repeatedly tell us there was no classified material? And then didn't she also tell us there was, okay, well, maybe classified material, but it was never marked classified material? There's 2 lies. And I guess the other question I'd have, what's the difference between extremely careless versus grossly negligent, which is a criminal standard? Again, I'm not an attorney. Seems like you're kind of doing a little arguing how many angels dance on the head of the pin. It was unbelievably reckless of the Secretary of State of the United States of America to set up a private server, which, let's face it, it's obvious why she did it. It wasn't out of convenience. It was to circumvent the Freedom of Information laws. So her private communications were never able to be accessed by the American public as the law requires. So we know she did this to circumvent the laws, circumvent public exposure, circumvent the American public's right to know, and in doing so put our nation's security at risk. I did read Comey's statement. He certainly said, although there's no evidence, because the Chinese and Russians are extremely good at hacking. He's certainly laying out the possibility. I would say we almost have to assume everything that passed over her private server was known to our enemies. And you have to understand, or you have to wonder, what kind of national security secrets were put at risk? Steve, I mentioned I've done a lot of negotiating. I can't imagine something more advantageous to negotiation than being able to read the email exchanges between the negotiator and headquarters. Well, our enemies might have been reading communications, regarding, Iran, Crimea, Ukraine. I don't know. Nobody knows. It's only conjecture. But what's certainly known is Hillary Clinton was unbelievably reckless with our nation's national security. Now she's running for president. I hope Americans have a very serious level of second thoughts based on what Director Comey revealed.
Mr. Trump then tweeted that these are his words, the system is rigged to exonerate Secretary Clinton. Do you agree, sir?
It certainly looks like there's 2 sets of standards. It just does. I'm not a prosecutor. Obviously, there's prosecutorial discretion. I'm having my staff look at it right now in terms of some of the claims that James Comey made in terms of, every other instance there was, willful intent. And there was pretty much willful intent in some of these emails we've already seen. So again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a prosecutor. I'll reserve judgment from that standpoint, but it certainly looks like there's a very definite double standard at play
And then
here.
just one final question on this subject. Do you think a special prosecutor is needed to look into the meeting between Attorney General Lynch and former President Clinton, sir?
Probably not. I mean, I think it's bad enough on its face, and that's probably all we're ever going to find out about it. Is it's completely inappropriate, completely inappropriate. You really got to question people's judgment to do that, both the Attorney General and former President Clinton.
Okay, now drawing on your chairmanship of Homeland Security, ISIS has been kicked out of Fallujah, but ISIS has responded with suicide bombs and attacks in Istanbul, Baghdad, Bangladesh. My question, what threat does ISIS' new lone wolf's tactic pose to Americans, sir?
A real significant and growing one. I mean, it's that simple. New York Times had a really interesting piece, I think it was over the weekend, and it laid out since September 2014, which, by the way, that was the month President Obama laid out America's goal as it relates to ISIS, which was to degrade and defeat ISIS. That was 22 months ago. But in those 22 months, ISIS has carried out, now this is as of Saturday, and we've had how many more attacks? Were there, I think, 3 in Saudi Arabia, 1 in Bangladesh, so we're probably up over 100. New York Times reported 97 either ISIS-inspired or directed terrorist attacks around the world outside of Iraq and Syria. More than 1,200 innocent people slaughtered by ISIS. Now, why have I been so strong in my prodding of President Obama to accomplish his goal of defeating ISIS? And the analogy I use is that of a beehive. Let's say you got a hive of killer bees in your backyard, and you got kids. What do you do with that hive? You take it out, you kill it. You kill the bees, right? You don't go in a stick and poke it. I mean, you might damage the hive, which is what we're doing. We're doing some damage to ISIS in Iraq and Syria, but you gotta take them out. You gotta defeat them, because what's happening right now, just like that beehive, they leave the nest, they set up other hives. They get a little ticked off, they start striking. Well, that's what's happening right now with ISIS. They are metastasizing, they're evolving. They're like a cancer. I mean, what are you supposed to do with the tumor? You take it out before it metastasizes. We haven't taken it out. It's metastasizing. It's spreading. And think of what ISIS has been able to do for the last 22 months in their territory, which they control. They have access to university research labs. You know, we've captured one of the Iraqi chemical weapons experts. He's been seeing like canaries, so we've been able to take things out, but they've been producing probably chemical weapons. They've been training. It is chilling. I've seen videos of people who have escaped ISIS describing the training of children to behead and, carry out this barbarity. So ISIS has been training their operatives now for 22 months. We talk about lone wolves. Now they're talking about wolf packs. That's what we saw in Brussels. Okay, that's what we saw. Again, that's what we saw in Istanbul. Now it's not just a lone wolf, it's packs. And it's not only just inspired, now it's directed. You think this is going away? It's obviously not going away. So are we going to finally, once and for all, start with the first objective, take out ISIS? It's literally at least 20 months too late. And so these wolf packs are already trained. Some have already been deployed. But better late than never.
Should we as Americans change our lifestyles in the light of the new ISIS tactics, sir?
No, but let's put pressure on a political leadership to accomplish the goal of defeating ISIS. That's what we have to do. Again, that's just the first step, folks. But it's the most important one. We've got to deny them that territory. We've got to end that caliphate, because every day that goes by where they exist, they're going to be perceived as winners. They're going to continue to inspire. They're going to be able to recruit. They're going to be able to continue to metastasize. You got to take out that tumor. You got to take out that beehive. That's the first step. But then you have to remain committed as a civilized world to isolating and finding Islamic terror wherever it resides. You understand the numbers that we're talking about here? There's about 1.6 billion Muslims. Even if the adherence to this barbarity is only 1/10 to 1%, that's 1.6 million people. I don't know what the percentage is. I can't get that out of anybody in terms of testimony. But this is a serious threat. It's not going away. Islamic terrorists declared war on America at least as far back as 1993 when they first tried to bomb. By the way, you know how big that bomb was in the World Trade Center? It was 1,300 pounds. It killed 6 people, injured about 1,000. And we treated that like a law enforcement problem. by burying our heads in the sand, by denying the reality, not taking out Osama bin Laden when we had a chance, we got 9/11. Not leaving a stabilizing force behind in Iraq, like we did in Germany, Japan, and South Korea. We allowed ISIS to rise from the ashes of what was a thoroughly defeated al-Qaeda in Iraq. Now we're dealing with the aftermath. 12,000 innocents slaughtered outside of Iraq and Syria. Are we going to wake up? Are we going to face that reality?
Do you have confidence in the judgment of President Trump to conduct American foreign policy, including the daily crisis in the Middle East for the next 4 years, sir?
Any president's going to need extremely good advisors.
Is that a yes?
Any president's going to need extremely good advisors.
While we're talking about Mr. Trump, should those that contemplate a challenge to Mr. Trump at the Republican National Convention, should they not go through with that, sir?
I'm not a delegate. I'll be here in Wisconsin, so I don't know what, I can't predict it. You know, Steve, it hasn't come across. I'm not a political pundit. I'm not a politician. I'm a citizen legislator. I'm a manufacturer from Oshkosh. I've got my own things that I can do to contribute to this process. The Chairman of Homeland Security, I've got a serious responsibility. I'm focused on those things.
Thank you. Speaker Ryan told TMJ Radio this morning that the bill he will ask the U.S. House to approve would allow law enforcement to go to court to try and block a gun sale to someone on the no-fly list. Is that a bill you could support?
Well, I actually offered an amendment. Had I had more time, I was really hoping Susan Collins' bill, I was hoping Senator Collins and the people who support her bill would go a little bit further and offer the constitutional due process up front. Put the burden of proof on the government, not on an American citizen. Had we done that, which is what my bill did, but again, I was hoping that she'd be able to offer hers, so the vote happened way too quick. I couldn't have enough time to sell my amendment. I did get 31 Republican senators. They barely had a chance to look at it, okay? So I think had I had more time, I think that really is the sweet spot in terms of how we actually solve this problem. Nobody wants to see a gun or any weapon get in the hands of terrorists or would-be terrorists. But we need to be extremely cautious. These lists, trust me, members of Congress don't really understand these lists. I've been in the conference rooms. They don't understand. By the way, there's nothing actually called the terrorist watch list. Do you realize that? There's a TIE database. Okay, there's the terrorist screening database, and then there's sub-lists from there. They're lists, very imperfect. You can get on a list if you got somebody who's not too nuts about you and they call in some pretty nasty accusations to the FBI. You're on the list. Now, don't you think you need some due process to be able to get off that list if you're going to be denied any kind of constitutional right? Or even the right to fly, which is not a constitutional right? So there was a law that required some due process, but it's all within TSA on the no-fly. But these are lists that were designed for law enforcement use, not to deny an American citizen a constitutional right. So we need to be very cautious about that. And I am a strong defender of our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Americans, Wisconsinites, ought to have the right to have an arm to defend themselves or family. And let's face it, the Second Amendment was really instituted by our founders, again, concerned about tyranny. And that's also an important aspect of this thing as well. So again, I'm going to strongly support and defend the Second Amendment. But we can do this reasonably, and here's the problem, is Democrats really don't want a solution. I hate to be partisan, but they don't, because they could have a solution. They could have joined Chuck Grassley a couple years ago and strengthened laws against straw purchases. They could have joined my amendment, which actually has a chance for passage. We got 31 Republicans. If we would have got 46 Democrats, the House would move on that, it'd be law. And it would have addressed this. It would have kept guns. It would have given the Justice Department the ability to block that sale and then give an American citizen due process. But they want an issue. They want to create a division rather than actually solve a problem. I want to solve a problem.
If the House passed Speaker Ryan's bill, do you think the Senate would reconsider the issue, sir?
I want to see what exactly Speaker Ryan's doing. If he takes up something like I proposed, I hope he does, and we've had some communication, but I think that's the sweet spot. But again, he's got members he's got to deal with. I'm not sure where they'll all go.
It's been estimated that 40% of American goods and imports would come under the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Your position on that?
That's why I'm giving it such careful consideration. Rather than making a snap, knee-jerk judgment, I'm actually doing the hard work. This agreement's over 6,000 pages long. I obviously come from the business world, manufacturing. Not many people in Washington actually have my private sector business experience. But I've got a little modesty in terms of how much I know. So I really understand my narrow slice of the plastics business. I don't understand the entire plastics business. Every business has its own complexities. The trade deal is very complex as it relates to every business. So we're going through the very thoughtful process of meeting with constituents, anybody who's got kind of a dog in this fight. Anybody who's be affected by this, and we're just going through the process of having them review the complexities of the deal versus the complexities of their business and whether they support it or not. I can tell you right now, the only people, and we're doing this almost on a daily, weekly basis, meeting with people. Currently, the only people that are against it is, my opponent, the unions who immediately made a snap judgment, which really baffles me, because the companies that employ them are strongly for it because they export products. I export products. The last thing we want to do is close markets to Wisconsin agriculture. So I think there's one farm group who's come out opposed. Every other farm group, every other constituency has come in strongly for it. And I always say, okay, from a scale 1 to 5, how much do you support it? 1 being the least, 5 the most. It's all in the 4 and 5 range. So the people I'm meeting with are strongly in support, but again, I'll continue to meet with people, see if they're contrary views, and in the end, when we vote on it, I'll make my decision then.
Do you plan to announce your position before the November 8th election, sir?
No, because I'll keep meeting with constituent groups and evaluate this until I have to take a vote, which is not unusual, by the way.
Okay, before we go to your question, maybe just one more. If you're reelected, what would be the central points of a immigration reform bill that you would push for in the next Congress, sir?
We first have to start with providing far greater security at our border. And, when I first found out that I was going to be chairman of this committee, when we won the re-election, I laid out, by the way, so we have a mission statement that we set priorities on the Homeland Security side of my committee. I've got 2 committees in one, really, Homeland Security and then Government Affairs, which is the Senate Oversight Committee. So on the Homeland Security side, 4 priorities were border security, cybersecurity, protecting our critical infrastructure, and countering Islamic terrorists. So on the border security aspect of this thing, we've held 18 hearings, published about a 100-page report on our findings after about a dozen hearings. But when I first started talking about border security as a priority, my vision of a border security bill would have a very robust and functioning guest worker program. Because if you want to secure the border, the number one thing you have to do is eliminate all the incentives we have in our law for illegal immigration. The number one incentive is people coming here to work, just like our ancestors. It's what's made this country strong, but it's got to be a legal process. If we eliminate that incentive for illegal immigration, make it a legal process, you're going to really cut down the number of people we have to watch coming to this country illegally. There are a bunch of other incentives as well that we have to end. That's the number one. So my concept of border security bills, first and foremost, make people coming to this country for work legal. By the way, when we had a legal guest worker program, the Bracero program in the 60s, got killed by, I think, Ted Kennedy and the unions, we didn't have an immigration problem. You had circularity of immigration. You had people from Mexico where you got a 6 or 7 or 8 times wage differential, come up, work the fields in California for 2 months, go home with a year's worth of salary. They would go back and forth, but the minute we ended that program, now there was a tendency to stay, and every bill we passed, I've actually done this in my committee. We've had these hearings on border security. I've laid out all the laws we passed to fix this problem. You probably understand that an awful lot of these laws, they sound good, they just don't fix. They just don't work. So starting back with Reagan's immigration reform, the amnesty, it was estimated, I think, 1.5 million people in this country illegally. Well, I think 3.5 million people took advantage of the amnesty. That's right. So we had 3.5 million back in the mid-'80s. Still was a problem. So we passed something else. We were up to 6 million, passed another bill, up to 9 million, passed another bill, up to 10, another bill. We passed all these bills, they sound good. And I guess members of Congress take credit for it. It just doesn't solve the problem. And we don't do a real good job like we do in the private sector, looking back and going, that didn't work. Maybe I'll try something different.
Thank you. Now it's through until 1:15. We'll take questions from the floor. Sir?
What are your thoughts about releasing the prisoners?
The question is your thoughts on releasing the prisoners, from Guantanamo, sir.
It's crazy. I don't have the exact numbers at my fingertips, but of the 600-some prisoners that were, I think 650 originally detained or over the time detained, I think we suspect close to 200 have returned to the battlefield. I think it's 97. PolitiFact, don't quote me on this. I'm using rough numbers, but somewhere at 97, and then another, whatever that we suspect have returned to the battlefield. the people that are left there now, I think we're less than 100. Let's face it, they are the worst of the worst. They're unlawful combatants. We're affording them all kinds of due process rights. They get a hearing every year. I've been down to Guantanamo, a first-class facility. They are treated with better humanity than they've ever been treated anywhere else. There's one guy, they tried to send him back, he didn't want to go. Okay? So no, if you want, the number one line of defense to keep this nation safe is an effective intelligence gathering capability. The best way to gather intelligence is to capture operatives, and then over time in a place like Guantanamo, I've talked to the interviewers, because that's what they're interviews. That's the way you gather intelligence. You interview people over a long period of time, multiple operatives. You start finding the discrepancies in the story. You start drilling down, and you start getting things revealed to you. Okay, so that's how you gather intelligence. But President Obama, because he's had, from my standpoint, a crazy policy of shutting down Guantanamo while we are at war with Islamic terrorists. And by the way, they declared war on us, not the other way around. We've been trying to avoid it like a plague. But they declared war on us. We better recognize that reality. But the best way of doing it is capture, detain, and interview over a long period of time, because we need that intelligence.
Next question, please.
Senator, entitlements are the biggest driver of our federal budget deficit. I'm wondering, maybe Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, I'm wondering your thoughts on...
Sure. Well, let me break down the $103 trillion because it's easy to break down. Over the next 30 years, Social Security will pay out about $14 trillion more in benefits than it takes in the payroll tax. Medicare, about $34 trillion. The rest of the $103 trillion, somewhere around $53 trillion, is interest on the debt. So if you want to avoid spending $53 trillion on interest to our creditors, we have to fix Social Security and Medicare. Now, the biggest one is Medicare. From my standpoint, and I talked about the marvel of a free market system, right? There are two areas of our economy where we've really removed basically the disciplines of the free marketplace. Education, because government by and large has a monopoly on it, and healthcare. Government pays for 40 to 50% of healthcare, monopoly there, and then it's all a third-party payer system where we disconnected the consumer of the product from the payment of the product. What was unfortunate about Obamacare is we were actually moving in the right direction in terms of healthcare, of reconnecting the consumer with the payment of the product. Things like HSAs, higher deductible plans. In my business, our premiums going through the roof, so I went to the people that work with me and said, listen, let's take advantage of HSAs. We're going to go to higher deductible plans, and the money we save in premiums, I'm not going to put that in my pocket. I'm going to distribute that to everybody in HSA accounts. Now, that's putting money in their pocket. It's their money. It's in an account. If they use it for health care, great. If not, they can have it for retirement. But now they are in charge of making consumer decisions, and the result of that was things like, places like Walgreens, Walmart, CVS, the marketplace developed walk-in clinics. So rather than taking your kid to an emergency room to get a ear infection diagnosed for $150, $250, you go into Walgreens and a nurse practitioner does it for $35. The marketplace is a marvel. So that's the direction. That's what we need to do across the board, is re-inject free market disciplines in our healthcare system. Social Security is a tough nut. I know a lot of people say, well, let's lift the ceiling on what's subject to FICA. Well, it'd be an enormous tax increase, and you're not going to get the revenue you expect to get out of it. So that's all statically scored. I hear all the time, well, let's just raise the retirement age. Now, I've actually laid out, by the way, a solutions menu, not my solutions, but just laid out things that have been proposed that have been scored to fill that $14 trillion hole. If we increase the age from 67 to 70 over just a 4-year time period, you know how much that saves the $14 trillion? By the way, that's the solution everybody proposed. We'll just increase the age over a long period of time. 67 to 70 over 4 years, that saves $1 trillion. You got $13 trillion to go, which is why I go back to economic growth. It solves so much of the problem. Have more wages at that FICA rate right now, and you'll have a lot more money flowing in the Social Security system. So I'll go right back to that. We got to grow our economy. And by the way, the way we have to do that, we have to reduce the regulatory burden. We have to have a competitive tax system. And while we all want a clean environment, that's a goal we all share, that's a good thing, let's utilize our God-given energy resources. Let's keep energy prices low so we compete in a global marketplace.
Question? Yes, sir?
Sir, you talk about the caliphate and ISIS having declared war on us. I'm sure that as much as the administration is plotting to defeat ISIS, as you called for, there's folks over in the Middle East doing the same as us. How do we defeat ISIS and the collateral damage that is incurred as we go after these hospitals or schools or wherever we think they are with our drones? Without, how can you love somebody who just destroys your family?
The question is, how do we defeat ISIS, and especially relevant to that is the collateral damage to civilians in schools. Sir?
So the model I've used, again, I'm not any way, shape, or form saying this is the troop level we need, because I don't know the troop level. By the way, I've never stated the troop level. Now, I've talked about how many stabilizing troops the generals asked for in Iraq. But George H.W. Bush, I think, laid out the model that can be followed in the first Gulf War. He assembled a committed coalition of the willing, very specific goal, which he met, and the effort was over. But in the first Gulf War, President Obama assembled a coalition. They provided 250,000 troops to the effort. America provided almost 500,000, but our coalition partners provided 250,000 troops to push Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. They also paid for about 85% of that effort. Now, only America can lead and develop that coalition, but we're not leading enough. And I realize it's a difficult problem. It's a fine line. If America leads too much, people stand back and go, we'll let them do it. If we don't lead enough, people sit back and go, well, it's not worth joining the fight. And that's where we're at right now. So we're pretty well doing it on our own. We're trying to utilize Iraqi security forces, which are doing better than a lot of people thought. But again, it's been 22 months. We defeated Nazi Germany in 4 years. 22 months. We had Brett McGurk, who's a good man, a really good man, kind of leading that effort in Syria and Iraq for the administration. He was in front of our Foreign Relations Committee last week, and I asked him about that 22-month time frame. He said, well, Senator, and we got a three-year strategy here. So when did that start? September 2014. Again, we're 22 months into it. Do you think we're going to complete the goal of defeating ISIS in the next 14 months? It doesn't look like it. But again, a committed coalition of the willing, of the civilized world, and by the way, every day that goes by, every terrorist attack in another country, understand how global this is, should make it a whole lot easier assembling that committed coalition of the willing. But again, we've got to remain committed long term, not just defeating ISIS, but now finding these nests wherever they are. And this is a long-term project. I'm not saying anything's easy about it, but if you want to face reality, and we have to face reality, we better start now. Again, it's reality I wish we didn't have to face.
Do you think we, our Congress, is committed?
Is Congress committed?
We would be if we were asked. It galls me. People say, well, you haven't passed authorization for use of military force. Well, President Obama is claimed he's got one. By the way, I would basically disagree other than by precedent. I mean, you read the authorizations he's using, it does not apply to this situation. It just doesn't. Read the wording. But he claims it. Nobody's challenging it. I'm not going to challenge it because I actually want him to accomplish his goal. The problem is when he's come to us with an authorization for use of military force, it's weaker than the one he's currently using. It would tie his hands. It would actually tie the hands of his predecessor. That's why we haven't passed an authorization for use of military force. We need a declaration of war. And I've read these things out loud in Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearings. I've read the declaration of war against Japan and Germany. Now there's declaration of war. There's a full commitment on the part of Congress and the American public to wipe out the enemy to accomplish the goal, which, by the way, I would never vote for an authorization unless I understood where the strategy was. I mean, I need to see, okay, how are you going to accomplish the goal? And then a commander-in-chief that was completely committed to accomplishing the goal. I would not put at risk the life and limb of any of the finest among us without that commitment and without a strategy that I thought could work, and I haven't seen that yet.
We have time for 2 more questions. Yes, sir?
Following up on the ISIS issue, you say we need to go ahead and wipe them out with a coalition of the willing. What do you think is the level of military involvement that would be required, and what would that do to recruitment efforts of other terrorist groups when we bring increased military force to bear in the area?
Level of military involvement to wipe out ISIS. Senator?
Yeah, our coalition partners, I think, in many respects, again, we've got very capable military coalition partners, and they would be fully engaged in the fight right with us, but America's going to have to lead, okay? And we've got marvelous technology to lead with. But what we really need is we need certainly the Sunni Arabs, and quite honestly the Shia Arabs and the Kurds, to then, when we clear the territory, to hold it. And of course, that's what George W. Bush did with the surge. You know, the Anbar Awakening. We had the Sunnis on our side, and when we cleared an area, when we defeated al-Qaeda, they went and held the territory. And so that's the primary requirement of coalition partners in terms of Arab states is they've got to go and hold those territories. Sunni areas by Sunnis, Shia by Sunnis, Kurd by Kurd. So
The question is, what does that level of military force do to recruitment efforts for other terrorist groups to get other people involved in those terrorist activities?
could the recruitment efforts be worse than they are right now? Yeah. I mean, I don't know. No. I think right now people are being, look at all the affiliated groups that weren't ISIS, weren't Al-Qaeda, but all of a sudden they're claiming ISIS. You know, they see success, they see a caliphate, so they're pledging their allegiance to ISIS. No, the rise of ISIS, the territory they hold, which is key to having that caliphate, that is what is inspiring the foreign fighters who are called by their ideology to do this, to be recruited and be involved in the process. Now, it is true, we're making some progress. Right now, ISIS is saying, okay, it's hard to get into Iraq and Syria, not a problem. Kill where you are. And that's what we're seeing, as well as the training, over time, the migrant flow, the operatives are streaming out these wolf packs, and we're starting to see the results. It's not going to end. So I would argue the recruitment ability is going to be dramatically reduced once we destroy that caliphate.
We have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
Let's end with infrastructure, a different topic. We could have fixed the infrastructure 7 years ago and created jobs for every level of this society. We didn't do it. When are we going to fix the infrastructure of this country?
When are we going to fix highways, bridges, et cetera?
It's one thing that has unanimous support in Congress is infrastructure. It's how do you pay for it? It is a tragedy that we spent $800 billion, and I can't get an exact figure on how much was actually spent on infrastructure in the stimulus. I think it's way under $100 billion. $800 billion buys a lot of infrastructure. You know, we've got about a $15 billion per year shortfall in the Highway Trust Fund, which I would argue is probably inadequate. We probably need to spend more. But we argue over $15 billion in a budget that exceeds $3,600 billion per year. Are you telling me you can't find $15 billion in a budget that's more than $3,600 billion large of lower priority spending to put toward what everybody considers a very high priority spending in terms of infrastructure? So this should be easy to solve. It would require presidential leadership that isn't going to continue to mortgage our kids' future, because that's where the hang-up is. How do you pay for it? I mean, I would argue don't spend money in some of these duplicated programs, some of these, and it is, by the way, it is true, there's a lot of waste and duplication in the federal government. We need to attack that, and we could easily pay for the infrastructure spending that I think everybody agrees is a high priority.
Maybe moderator privilege, one last quick question. If Secretary Clinton won on November 8th, do you think the Senate should confirm Judge Garland, who you've met with?
Well, we're certainly going to be faced with that kind of problem. I'm hoping that's not the case. I mean, I want to make sure that we only confirm judges to the bench. And I think that's the stumbling block right now, is that anybody that President Obama and Justice Garland certainly fits this mold from my standpoint, super legislator. People that will legislate from the bench rather than have the fidelity, the integrity to the written word of the law and the Constitution. I didn't get elected. People supported me, didn't elect me to confirm super legislators to the Supreme Court. They elected me, voted for me to only vote for confirmation of judges like Scalia.
Thank you. I want to respect the Senator's time. I want to respect your time. And would you join me in thanking Senator Johnson?
Well, thank you all. Appreciate it.
An MCM production.